yeah, come in closer. And if you want to sit so you can look straight on, that's also good. Okay? Amen. Praise the Lord. Well, this morning we want to spend a little bit on regarding the signs of the time concerning the second coming of Christ. Because as we shared last night, God's desire is that we would all grow and mature to become not just sons of God, but to become kings and priests in the coming kingdom age. And, when you look at your education, it doesn't take you 40 or 50 years to get your bachelor's degree in some science, right? I mean, for pharmacy, how long did it take for you to get to there? 4 years of studying. And one practicum, right? So, in all of man's training for what we need to do, there is always a period of time. It's not dragged out until you're like 100 years old and then you start practicing pharmacy. Even when you look at the King of England, you have Prince Harry and Prince, who's the other guy? William, right. Harry and William. I mean, is it going to take them 50 years to be fully trained as kings, to reign over England? Absolutely not. Right? They went through formal education, but then after that they had to go through experiences. They had to gain life experiences. And eventually, yes, they'll be prepared to be kings and priests. And so we need to realize that there is a sense of urgency. And with the signs of time, we want to just to really bring to light how quick we are. So let me see if this is if I can run it. Okay. All right, so many of you know this chart, right? I believe it's right there, right? You have this chart. You all know this chart? So what is this chart all about? Come on, you guys. What is this chart all about? It's to show us the timeline in terms of God's desire to bring in His kingdom. Right? And we're not going to spend time to go through it, but what I want to point out is this. From the beginning, after God created the heavens and the earth, you have to realize that the archangel Lucifer, he was ruling over the earth at the time. He was the caretaker of it. He wanted to be equal to God. And so because of that, he rebelled against God. And when he rebelled against God, a third of the angels followed him, and the whole of creation also fell with him. This is why God had to judge the earth. And that's why in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, it's that the earth was what? Tohu bohu, chaos. And it was judged, it was covered with the water. And in Genesis chapter 1, we see God's restoration of the earth and the creation of Adam and Eve. His desire was that man would rule and reign over the earth. Not only that, but his desire was that man would also destroy and cast out Satan. Because it would have been very easy for God to just, say one word and Satan would be gone. Right? That could have been taken care of a long time ago. We wouldn't have to go through all of this. But God's desire was that man would overcome and destroy the devil. And that's why when you read through the scripture, you see man's attempt each time moving up and closer until where we are today. And when you look at this whole timeline, you have to realize that we are right here at the very end of the church age. We are on the verge of coming into the 1,000-year millennial kingdom. Okay? We have to have this realization that we are this close. And so that's why this morning we want to spend a little bit of time regarding the signs of time. Because the Lord did say to His disciples what the signs of time will be. Now let's all turn to Matthew chapter 24 and let's read verses 3 and 4. Matthew chapter 24 verses 3 and 4. Okay, and let's read these two verses together, verses 3 and 4. Okay? Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" And Jesus answered and said to them, "Take heed that no one deceives you." Okay. So, the disciples already had a desire to know when the Lord will come back. We all should have this desire. We not only want the Lord to come back, we also should have the same seeking heart to know when will this day be. And this is why the Lord said, "Take heed that no one deceives you." That means God will be very clear regarding the signs of time. And that's why he says, "Take heed that no one deceives you." So, what are the signs of the time? And we're going to spend focus in these 4 areas this morning. And we're not going to be able to get into the same amount of detail that we did back in Fountain Valley, but we want to give you a taste to see what are the signs of the time. And the 4 areas, number 1 is regarding the nation of Israel. Just because today we're focused on the heavenly Jerusalem, don't think that God is done with Israel. Israel today, the earthly Israel, has very much to do with the signs of time regarding the Lord's coming. We also need to realize that we are coming to the end of the age of democracy. And we'll see that as well. And then the Lord did say in Matthew and in Luke that as in the days of Noah and as in the days of Lot, after that, and when you're in that time, again, judgment will come quickly. And Revelation chapter 2 and 3 also shows us that when you look at the development of the church today, we are also now coming to the last stages, the end of the new covenant age. The age we live in today as the church, we are in the final stages. We really are. Now you might say, well, wait a second. In Matthew 24, didn't it say that only the Father knows the day and time, right? Some of you may know this verse in verse 36, 24. It says, "But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only." So you might be saying, well, how can you say we know when the end will come? Well, we don't know the exact what? We don't know the exact day. We don't know if it's February 15th. And we don't know if it's 11 p.m. at night. Yeah, we don't know the exact day or time. Only the Father knows. But we all need to be highly aware. In 1 Thessalonians 5, it says, "We are sons of the light, sons of the day, that this day should not take us by surprise." It should not overtake us as a thief in the night. So that means the Lord will show us very clearly when this will happen. What are the signs? So let's go to Daniel chapter 9, because as it relates to the signs of Israel, we need to take a look at a prophecy that speaks concerning the first and the second coming of Christ. So if we turn to Daniel chapter 9, Daniel chapter 9, you can all follow along here. The 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, to finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. So, verse 24 tells us of the 70-week prophecy. This 70-week prophecy speaks concerning of both the first and the second coming of Christ. We know this because in verse 24, it describes who the Lord Jesus Christ is as the coming Messiah. I mean, who is going to be able to finish transgression, make an end of sin? Who's going to be able to bring in reconciliation? Only Christ himself. And who will be able to bring in the Father's kingdom of everlasting righteousness, seal up vision and prophecy? This can only be Christ. And the 70 weeks prophecy gives us a time span in terms of when he will come. Now, if you go on to verse 25, it says, "Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah, the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublesome times." So this verse here in verse 25 tells us when Jesus Christ will come the first time. And we know at the first time, it says there was a decree to rebuild Jerusalem. That's why it says, from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem. Okay? So that's the start time of the prophecy. And then it goes on until Messiah the Prince, meaning the day that Jesus Christ comes into Jerusalem, riding on the donkey. And that was the only day that the Jews proclaimed Jesus as the King of the Jews. Just that one day. So, it tells us also the time. It says there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, meaning a total of 69 weeks. Now, each week refers to 7 years. And when you multiply 7 times 69, you get 483 years. And when you go by the days, the prophetic year, there's 360 days. What you're looking at is a total of 173,880 days. That's the time span between the decree going out to the time when Jesus comes into Jerusalem. Now we also know the actual start date, because through Nehemiah, we also will know what is the start date. And if you check with the history books, it's actually March 5th, 444 BC. And when you count forward 173,880 days, exactly to March 30th, 33 AD, that was the day Christ entered into Jerusalem. And we know this when you look at the verses there in John chapter 12. Okay? So, remember, one thing to know, why did I spend a little bit of time here, is to show you that God is exact to the day when it comes to his coming, both his first and second coming. So, if you go on to verse 26, it says, "After 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, not for himself, and the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And the end of it shall be with a flood till the end of the war of desolations are determined." Meaning this prophecy also tells us that Christ was crucified, right? When it says Messiah was cut off, he was crucified. And then this second person, the prince that comes in, is when Israel was destroyed. Remember, when the people rejected God as Jesus Christ, God judged Israel. And in 70 AD, the Roman prince Titus, with his armies, came into Jerusalem and destroyed the temple and turned Jerusalem under the rule of the Gentiles and scattered all of the nation of Israel. Okay? So this was prophesied here in verse 26. And there was a suspended time of about 2,000 years until today. Okay? Now verse 27 speaks about the final week, the 70th week. And it says, "Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall be the one who makes desolate, even until the consummation," meaning the end of the prophecy, "which is determined is poured out on the desolate." So the start of the final week is when there is a peace treaty signed, this peace covenant. And then we know that at the end, 7 years later, you have the second coming of Christ. Okay? So this, we need to be very clear regarding the second coming of Christ. It'll be exact. When will this peace treaty be signed? We don't have a day, but we know that 7 years later, once the peace treaty is signed, Christ will come again. Okay, so this is why no one knows the day or the time of when Christ will come, because we don't know when this peace treaty will be signed. But once this peace treaty is signed, then we know exactly 7 years later, Christ will descend upon this earth. So, as we speak about the signs of time regarding Israel, now think about this. Now, Israel was destroyed in 70 AD, right? And you might wonder, well, how can you have a peace treaty if Israel was destroyed in 70 AD? So what we have to pay attention to leading up to the peace treaty is what are the signs regarding Israel? So now if in 70 AD there was no Israel, for 1,824 years there was no Israel. But the Lord did prophesy this in Matthew chapter 23, verse 24, verses 32 and 33. It says, "Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branches had already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors." Now this is related to Israel. The fig tree relates to Israel. And it says when the summer is near, meaning when the fig tree is restored. When Israel is restored, then you need to know that the time is near. And so what happened? In 1948, Israel declared itself as an independent state. And this was a miraculous event in mankind's history because never before has there been a country that was destroyed and then 1,824 years later it was restored. And so this is the first sign regarding Israel. The Lord also goes on in Luke 21 and he prophesied, "And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." In 1967, you have to also see that the conquest for East Jerusalem occurred during the Six-Day War. And in the Six-Day War, Israel was once again able to retake the old city where the temple site is. And this was fulfilled in 1967. Now now we're getting very close. Because what is this final sign that needs to be? We just read it. With might he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. What we're speaking about here is there will be a peace treaty that will be made in Israel, which will enable them to restart animal sacrifices and offerings. So this peace treaty in the Middle East, this is what everybody's looking for. Okay? So, one thing I want to bring up here is related to the signs from heaven. Because with Israel, with these major events in Israel, we also need to see there are also the signs from heaven. Oops. Let me see if I can control it from here. Yeah. Okay. So in Luke it says, "And there will be great earthquakes in various places, and famines and pestilence, and there will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven." You know, growing up in the church life, we all were taught, don't follow astrology and horoscopes. And rightfully so, we shouldn't, because that's all superstitious. Right? That definitely we should not follow. But we need to realize that God uses the heavens, the stars, the moons, In Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, it says, "Then God said, let there be light in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from night, and let them be for signs and seasons, and for days and years." Meaning, God will use... Oops, did I go backwards? Okay. Oh, I must be clicking on things. That's one thing here. Okay. God is going to use signs from heaven to let us know major events. I mean, think about this, right? Saying that, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen the star in the east and have come to worship him." Don't forget, God uses the stars as signs from heaven. When Jesus Christ was born, that was the star that was there. And then, regarding the Great Tribulation, "And I will show wonders in heaven and in earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord." Sixth seal. The sixth seal. We'll talk more about the sixth seal tonight. "And there will be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, and the sea and the waves roaring." So the signs from heaven is important. So there is this one sign from heaven that we should be aware of, and it's called a tetrad. What is a tetrad? A tetrad is, I'll explain it, I'll build it out a little bit. First of all, we have a lunar eclipse. A lunar eclipse is, you all know what a lunar eclipse is, right? When you have the earth shadow blocking out the moon when the sun is shining, and you get a total eclipse. And what happens is the moon turns reddish because there's still some of the light that travels around the earth in the atmosphere, and it does get through, and it casts kind of a red light onto the moon. Now, when a tetrad means is when the moon or the red moon occurs 4 times in succession. One right after another in a span of 2 years. This phenomenon happened 55 times since first 1 AD. And when you look at history, 10 of them related, when you look at the feast, 10 of the tetrads coincides with the Jewish feast. And in the last 500 plus years, 4 coincided with the Jewish feast since 1493. So again, visually, this is what we mean by tetrad. In 2 successive years, you see 4 lunar eclipses. And not only do you see 4 lunar eclipses, but they match up with the Jewish feasts. So in 2014, 2015, the tetrad did happen. The first one coincides with the first feast, the Feast of Passover. And then the second one coincides with the last feast of the year, the Feast of Tabernacle. And it happened again in 2015 as well. So you have the tetrad. It coincides with the feast. You have to believe that is God who, remember, it was God who appointed the times for the feast specifically. And God was the one who created the heavens and the earth. So he knew that these dates would coincide with the tetrad. Now, why is this important? Okay. There are exactly 4 tetrads in the last 523 years. The first tetrad occurred in 1493, 1494. That was around the time Christopher Columbus discovered the New World. Okay? So that's the first tetrad. The second tetrad happened in 1949, 1950. That was the time when Israel became a nation again. Yes, they declared their independence in 1948, but it was a year later when they signed an armistice, a treaty, to allow Israel to exist as a nation. That was in 1949. Then the third tetrad the third tetrad, happened in 1967, 1968. And this was the recapture of East Jerusalem. The last tetrad happened in 2014, 2015. And the question is, what event happened here? Not yet peace treaty. Is there a peace treaty? Did we see a peace treaty? Yes, last year or the year before? Okay. So now we have to dissect this verse a little bit more. We have to see this a little bit more with clarity. According to the last prophecy in Daniel 9, there is a person called, there's a he, right? So you have the seventh king. He. Okay, I'm just going to use this. And he will make a peace treaty, right? For 1 week, meaning it'll last for 7 years. And this is a peace treaty that must allow Israel to once again offer up sacrifices. Okay, now, this is a quote. It says, "I would love to be able to be the one that makes peace with Israel and the Palestinians. A lot of people tell me, really great people tell me, that's impossible. You can't do it. I disagree. I think you can make peace. I have reason to believe I can do it." This is a quote from the United States of America's newest president, Donald Trump. And this was quoted in the New York Times after he won the election. And when you look at his 18 months of campaigning, which began in June of 2015, one of his major campaign promises is to bring peace to Israel. That began in June of 2015. And after he was elected, he reaffirmed this. And after his inauguration, he is actively seeking to make this happen. And if you follow the news, you will see that this is happening. So, the friend of Israel, King Cyrus. When the children of Israel were in captivity in Babylon, in the book of Ezra, who was it that issued a proclamation for the children of Israel to come back to rebuild the temple? It was King Cyrus. And in the prophet of Isaiah, God already told Isaiah that he had chosen King Cyrus. That's why it says, "Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held, to subdue nations before him, to loose the armor of kings, and to open before him the double doors for Jacob my servant, and Israel my elect. I have called you by name, I have named you, and though you have not known me, I am the Lord, and there is no other. There is no God besides me. I will gird you, and through you, though you have not known me." So God used a heathen king to bring the call out to rebuild Jerusalem, or rebuild the temple. And very oddly, the Jerusalem Post is showing us very clearly that Donald Trump, right, the president-elect, will be the best friend of Israel ever had. Will be best friend Israel ever had. And if you watched the meeting, the press release between Donald Trump and the Prime Minister of Israel, they had a very good meeting. And they talked about the peace process. Okay? And then the president, President Trump, he also recognized Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel. First president to ever say that. And when you look at some of the headlines here, right? So these are some of the headlines that you can already see. Why is this significant? Why did he declare that? Because he wants to move. Right now, today, the United States Embassy, along with all the rest of the world's embassies, where do they have their embassies? It's in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is currently the capital for Israel. But our new president wants to move that embassy quickly to Jerusalem. Right? So these are just some of the headlines that have been going on. And then on top of that, what's very interesting is there are also headlines going on of the talk of rebuilding the temple. Israel have already asked the two strongest world leaders to help them rebuild the temple. And even in this news site, it says, we are poised to rebuild the temple. The political conditions today in which two most important national leaders in the world support the Jewish right to Jerusalem as their spiritual inheritance is historically unprecedented. On top of that, the Temple Institute. This is the Jewish group of people who are responsible for rebuilding the temple. They've made a call out to the descendants of Aaron to come back to Jerusalem to be trained again, according to Leviticus, a 5-year training program. That's how long it took to train the Levites. 5 years. This happened last summer already. It's starting. The training of the earthly priests to offer up animal sacrifices. It's not a small thing today that we are talking about the spiritual sacrifices of the real holy and royal priesthood. So you can already now see in parallel the earthly priesthood being restored. And then these are just 3 of many articles that are out there that speaks about the talks for the peace treaty. Right? This is the quote that we already read in New York Times. If you look at the foreign policy of the president on his website, he says, peace through strength will be at the center of our foreign policy. We will achieve a stable, peaceful world with less conflict and more common ground. There has never been another person that is so prepared in making the deal. They call it the art of the deal. Right? So this is happening, and it's happening very fast. Now, having seen this, you also need to realize who doesn't want the peace treaty to be signed? Who do you think doesn't want the peace treaty to be signed? Satan. Because Satan knows when the peace treaty is signed, he has 7 years left. That's why in Matthew chapter 11, verse 12, it says, and from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. Think about it. At the end of World War II, before Germany and Japan were about to fall, how hard were they fighting? Do you think they just kind of rolled over and said, okay, the Americans, let them win? Did they do that? No. They fought to the death. They threw everything they could to stop the defeat. Right? The Japanese, what did they do? They had kamikazes, right? They had planes flying in. Pilots willing to die by flying their planes into the aircraft carriers. So don't even think once that the enemy would rest before this peace treaty is signed. Satan will do everything he can to oppose the peace treaty. So now, what do you think he's going to do to make that peace treaty not happen? Look at his campaign for 18 months. You here in Canada, you listen to CNN, right? In the United States, we call that the Clinton News Network. And today we call it the Crooked News Network. Because what it was doing was it gave you a false narrative. Some people call it fake news. To tell you all of the terrible things of the candidate during that time. There was no factual reporting during that time. Now, after he was elected, they were in a state of shock. I hope you were not in a state of shock. I hope you realized that God was doing something. Because against such great opposition, how can such a man stand to win the presidency? You have to realize that God is behind it. But then after he was inaugurated, okay, so when he got elected, they were doing everything they could to say he's not the president. But then he got inaugurated. Now, what do you think the enemy wants to do after he was inaugurated the president? Okay, let me tell you what happened. The day after he was inaugurated, in that 500,000 women's march, you all know this famous singer called Madonna? This is what she said. Yes, I am very angry, Madonna said. Yes, I am outraged. Yes, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House. Okay? So this is from a pop star in front of a world stage saying, I thought of an awful lot to blow up the White House. You kind of laugh at it, but don't even think once that Satan doesn't want to have this man eliminated. Satan will do everything. And then another actress called for the military to overthrow Donald Trump. This is serious. They're talking about assassinating him. They want to get rid of him with a military coup. And guess who else of all people? Obama. This is a Pentagon official from the Obama administration says the anti-Trump military coup now is possible. So even the past president wants to overthrow this person, have this person killed. You should not be naive and you should not be ignorant. This man was chosen by God. We know this. When you read Daniel chapter 5, verse 21, it says, and the Most High God, who rules over the kingdom of men, will appoint over it whom he chooses. And this is written 3 times in Daniel. Twice in Daniel chapter 4 and 1 time in Daniel chapter 5. So do not be naive, brothers and sisters. Satan is fast at work. He wants to make sure this peace treaty is not signed, and he will do everything, including inciting assassination attempts, to make sure this peace treaty would not be signed. We all need to wake up, brothers and sisters. This is a real spiritual warfare. Satan is doing everything he can. He will not lie down. He will not rest to make sure this peace treaty is not signed. That's why you see so much opposition to this man. Okay? So, at what point in time are we in? In 1 Thessalonians. You need to realize this. It says, from when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction will come upon them. Meaning, when the peace treaty is signed, yes, there's going to be joy in the world. We got peace and we have safety. But that will be short-lived because sudden destruction will come. Because that is the final prophecy that needs to be fulfilled before the Lord comes back. And tonight we'll see the details of the final 7 years. But we need to be clear that the start of the final 7 years is coming very quickly with the peace treaty. Okay? And now, remember I said the Most High God appoints over whom he chooses. You might say, well, is really God the one who picks the world leaders? Does he really have that kind of a power? Then you need the other prophecy in Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2. The verses are written here. This was the dream of King Nebuchadnezzar. King Nebuchadnezzar, he had a dream, and he needed someone to interpret it. Long story short, he said, I will not tell you the dream, but you need to tell me what the dream was, and you need to interpret it. So God gave Daniel not only the dream, but also the interpretation. So the dream said this: You, O king, are watching, and behold a great image. This image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form awesome. So then it goes on. This image head was of fine gold. Okay? And then it goes on, it says, its chest and arms of silver. And then it goes, and its belly and loins of bronze, and its legs of iron. And its feet of partly of iron and partly of clay. So these were in Daniel chapter 2. Then it goes on, and it says, You watched while stone was cut out of without hands, which struck the image on the feet of iron and clay and broke them into pieces. So there's this stone that hit the feet. And then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. So the image was gone, and the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the earth. This is the two verses there, Daniel chapter 2, verse 34 and 35. Why is this significant? Because this prophecy shows us man's government from the time of Babylon until the second coming of Christ. We don't have time, but this is a summary to show you that God is really the one in control who appoints all of the leaders in all of the empires. The golden head referred to King Nebuchadnezzar. It actually said that in Daniel chapter 2, if you go back and read it. And then the silver chest and arms relates to the Mede and the Persian Empire. And then the belly and the loins of bronze, this referred to the time of the Greek Empire. Alexander the Great rose up and defeated the Persians. But then after Alexander the Great, you had the iron legs, the two long iron legs. And this was at the time of the Roman Empire and all of its offshoots. All of the different monarchies, all the different kingdoms after the Roman Empire. Iron legs meaning ruled with a strong rule. All the way until you get down to the feet. And the feet, made out partially of iron and clay, refers to the time of democracy, the time that we live in today. Okay? And then eventually we get to the 10 toes, which we'll have a little bit more detail. So what point of time are we in today? We are in the point of democracy. And democracy started in 1776. And up until now has run for 240 years. The last part of the feet are the 10 toes. The 10 toes refer to the 10 kings in the last 3.5 years before Christ comes. These are the 10 kings that will join together with the Antichrist, the beast, and they will reign for 3.5 years at the end. So we know this time is 3.5 years. So the question is, when will that happen? Right? So again, this prophecy is showing us that we are very close. We are really at the end of an era. The decadence of democracy. Now, decadence is a big word, so I wrote down some of the definition. The active process of falling into an inferior condition or state, deterioration, decay, moral degeneration, and an unrestrained and excessive self-indulgence. Now, Mo is going to talk about this after our short break regarding moral degeneration and excessive self-indulgence, meaning the lovers of themselves. But what I want to bring out in relationship to this prophecy of Daniel 2 is we are really at the end of the age of democracy. You see corruption at all levels. Just look at the campaign. The DOJ, the FBI, colluded together with the other candidate. Think about it. If an American citizen were to have top secret information on a private email server, not protected by the government, and you have it sitting in the basement of the closet of your own home. If I had that, what do you think the government's going to do to me? They'll put me into jail, they'll put me away for a very long time. But somehow, the DOJ and the FBI, even though they know this, did not prosecute and put that candidate away. Why? You can see the corruption in the government. And if you have a corrupt government, you cannot have a democracy. We also have a corrupt media. Today in America, the biggest debate is regarding what is fake news. And fake news is not just in the media, but it's also in the social media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of these places. Now, it was already spoken in 2 Thessalonians that this will happen. It says the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. And it says the working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders with all unrighteous deception. Unrighteous deception. And then for this reason, God will send them strong delusions that they should believe the lie. Why? That they all may be condemned who did not believe the truth but had pleasure in unrighteousness. You need to understand today, if you're watching these news sources, any of these news sources, you are deceived. You are deceived. And it's taking the American public 4 weeks since the inauguration to finally realize that they cannot trust the media. This is a poll that came out yesterday. 45% of the American public believes the president, and only 42% believe the media, the news. Right. The only news source that we have found that's even somewhat objective is Fox News. But even Satan has attacked Fox News. He had the president of Fox News removed because there was an alleged sexual scandal. But after he was removed, no trial, no lawsuit. Just a controversy. So you can see Satan is fast at work, trying to bring all of the social media, all of the mainstream media, to give you a false narrative. Okay? Hollywood. Some of us like to watch the Academy Awards or the Grammys, the awards for all the artists. Those are now political platforms to propagate lies to the American public. All the TV shows, like Saturday Night Live, they're propagating lies, false narratives. And if you listen and you keep listening to this stuff, you will be no different than the ones who are in this delusion, who will believe the lie. And when the peace treaty comes, you'll be shocked, as you were when Donald Trump became president. The last thing regarding the end of democracy. Remember, in order to have a democracy, number one is you have to have at least a government that's not corrupt. And number two, as an educated voter, you need to know the truth. So if the media is lying to you, you don't know how to vote. The last thing is this, the rise of the millennial generation. 2 Timothy tells us, know this in the last days, perilous time will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasures rather than lovers of God. Paul already wrote, what I didn't realize was this is the description of the millennials. The generation, this next generation of young people. A millennial is someone who was born 1980 and beyond. Or later. Meaning, if you were born in 1980 or later, and it's the me generation. In America, what is really happening in America is this. A millennial expects things. Because all their lives, they were always given a nice trophy for just showing up. You join a sports team, and you get a nice little trophy. And if you're the MVP, your trophy is just a little bit bigger. And it doesn't matter how well you do or how bad you do. Very good. You did a great job. And if there's any problems in their lives, the parents go and talk to the teachers for them. And today, if you have problems with the work, the parents will go talk to your boss for you. No, you laugh. This is really happening. My brother, who is a director at one of the largest consulting companies, their human resources have to train them how to deal with the parents who call in because you gave their child a bad review. Yeah, you laugh. Not only that, these millennials, if they don't get what they expect, they feel very indignant. How dare you not give me the corner office? I came to work, shouldn't I get the nice corner office with the beautiful view? You laugh, but this is happening. This is happening in the workforce. Why? Because we have a generation called helicopter parents. Helicopter parents. We hover around our kids and we do everything for them. This is why millennials don't know how to take pressure. They don't know how to deal with pressure or sufferings, or even to know how to make mistakes. We have a neighbor across the street. Their boy, a senior or a junior in high school, got his first B and he went into depression. First B and went into depression. He now needs counseling and he needs meds. This is called a millennial. Okay? And actually, it's not just a millennial. The characteristics of a millennial is what we call a snowflake. Very beautiful, very delicate, and if you just touch it a little bit, it'll disintegrate. Okay? Now, why do I talk about the millennials? Because they don't want democracy. This next generation of young people do not think it's important to have democracy. This is a survey taken. And it said, if you were born in the 1930s, 75% of the people born in the 1930s say it is essential to have democracy, to live in democracy. It is very essential to live in democracy. But when you get to the age of the millennials in 1980 or beyond, only 25% think it's essential to live in democracy. I mean, 75% of them don't care. They would rather live in communism or socialism. They would rather have other forms of government instead of democracy. Okay? So the most important thing you need to realize is, even with our young people, the end of democracy is upon us. Okay? We are just about to end democracy. Even all of these news organizations, after Donald Trump was elected, already said, the end of democracy is upon us. In Singapore, there's a news website called Straits Times. They said, we do not know exactly what future holds for us in world politics, but we can be sure of one thing. We are at the end of an era. This is Singapore who said that. When you look at the BBC, it says, with one referendum, Brexit, and presidential election, Trump, liberal democracy as we've known it seems finally dramatically to have collapsed in itself. Foreign affairs. Again, same thing here. But even the Germans said it. Democracy is at a dead end in America. So, this is what is being reported today. So, again, where are we? We are very close before we get to the 10 toes. Okay? And once the 10 toes, tonight we will talk about what will happen in the final 3.5 years. So again, at what point of time are we in today? Knowing this, that now is high time to awake out of sleep, for now our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. This is already even written there in Romans. And now when these things will begin to happen, look up and lift up your heads, because your redemption draws near. And then the last one here. Blessed is he who reads and those who hears the words of this prophecy and keeps those things which are written in it, for the time is near. And the last verse that we should be aware, it says, but take heed to yourselves, that our hearts would be weighed down with carousing and drunkenness. That's probably not our issue, but our issue is the cares of this life. That our hearts would be weighed down with the cares of this life. That the day comes on you unexpectedly. This is where we're at, brothers and sisters. You know, I know in Fountain Valley, a year ago, many did not really pay attention to what is going on with Israel, what is going on with democracy. But today, many have woken up because they realize that the time is near. And yeah, many of us, we have on our phones, we have news alerts. We can subscribe specifically to follow what is going on in the peace process. And every time we see these alerts come up, as much as it gets me angry, but it's also a prompting from the Holy Spirit to pray that the Most High God will finish the job using our current president. Right? We are very close, brothers and sisters. So we need to wake up. Okay? So with that, we'll just take a short break, and then we'll come back and Moses will cover the last two signs.